Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. This is the 13th part of What If Deku Had a Robot Wolf. I hope you enjoy. Link to the original story and author in the description. Chapter 13, Battle Trial Part 2. Nito Monoma looked up at the building before them. Hitoshi and Fumikage were already inside and preparing their defenses. He had no idea what his friend was planning, but he could already tell that they were at a disadvantage. Alright, we're going to be at a disadvantage here, he said, turning towards Yui. I'll run out of quirk time due to the setup time, meaning I can only copy your quirk. We'll have to be stealthy for this and avoid them the best we can. Plus I have no idea if I can copy Dark Shadow or not. Yui said, looking at him with a puzzled look. Dark Shadow is a sentient quirk. Nito said they are very rare, so this is the first time I've met one. I've never been able to try and copy one before, so, worst case scenario, the only quirks I can copy are yours and Hitoshi's. And Hitoshi's redundant as it gives him immunity to other mental quirks, so I can't brainwash him with his own quirk. Yui said with a nod. Looks like we're going to have to take the stealth approach to this, Nito said. We won't last long if they find us. And begin. The number one hero's voice boomed across the field. Stay low, and follow me, Nito said as they slowly made their way into the building, and immediately came across a problem. His shoes were tapping against the stone floor. Shit, he swore under his breath, cursing his choice in footwear. He quickly removed them and threw them aside. There, that should dash, he said before the creepiest rendition of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star echoed throughout the building. The voice singing was female and cold and had an aura of dread about it. They couldn't tell who was making it or where it was coming from. The first one was the most horrifying, as their opponents were both guys. So, who was singing? By the time the song had finished, both teens were undeniably creeped out. So, not going to lie, but I am terrified right now, Nito said quietly. He wasn't exactly great with horror. He had been getting better with it, but there were some things that still scared him. Creepy singing voices were one of them. Let's keep moving, it's too dangerous to stay in one place for long. Yui nodded silently as they carried on, moving as quietly as they could as they made their way to the second floor, all the while creepy noises filled the air around them, unnerving the both of them. Even Yui, who looked as expressionless as always, was freaked out by the noises they were hearing. I am going to be having words with Hitoshi after this, Nito stuttered as they looked around, shuddering with fear. He knows he said before a large, black, clawed hand grabbed him, letting out a quiet yelp before he was dragged screaming down a dark corridor. Yui quickly rushed after him, but suddenly found herself entangled by some strong fabric and pulled to the floor. Going somewhere, hero? A sinister voice said behind her. She looked up to see Hitoshi standing behind her, holding on to the ends of his capture weapon. Your friend won't last long. And neither shall you, he said, but that wasn't his voice. It was different. Was this his mask's doing? Yui quickly grabbed the captured weapon and enlarged it, making it too large for Hitoshi to use effectively. Nito Monoma has been eliminated, All Might announced. Yui mentally cursed as she got up. Of course, Nito wouldn't last long against Fumikage and Dark Shadow. He only had her quirk to use, and they were still unsure if he could copy Dark Shadow. But that was a problem for later, as right now she had to deal with Hitoshi, which proved easier than expected. The sudden enlargement of his capture weapon caused him to get entangled in it. She charged forwards and barged into Hitoshi as he struggled to unwrap himself, forcing him to the floor and causing him to be further entangled by his weapon. She then quickly rolled him to the side, wrapping him up in his own weapon before shrinking it, tightening it around him until he was partially mummified by it and completely restrained. Hitoshi Shinso has been eliminated, All Might said. Hitoshi sighed. Looks like we're even, he said, voice unchanged. Yui didn't respond. She's already made that mistake once and wasn't going to make it again. So she turned and walked away, only to yelp when she suddenly found herself in the claws of a rather large dark shadow. The living shadow slowly brought Yui closer to her, bringing them face to face. Oh hey, you didn't faint this time, the living shadow said. Nito fainted like a bitch before we could start gloating. Dark Shadow. Fumikage shouted as he walked up beside her. Don't insult our classmates like that. Apologies, but you never stood a chance against us, he said before he wrapped capture tape around her.
Yui has been eliminated. All Might announced villain team win. Yui let out a disappointed sigh.
Even though she managed to take out Hitoshi, they still weren't able to win, not helped that they were scared out of their minds thanks to whatever their opponents were doing. She pressed her fingers together and deactivated her quirk, restoring Hitoshi's capture weapon to its normal size and letting him escape. Dark Shadow put Yui down before reverting to her normal size. That was fun.
Let's do it again.
Let's not, Hitoshi said as he got back up and wrapped his capture weapon up.
We need to head back to the observation room. Fumikage, Yui, can you carry Nito? I'll go free Kana. No need.
Kana said as she walked up to them, carrying the rope they had used to tie her up.
What the?
Fumikage gasped, surprised that their teacher was already free without help. How did you escape so quickly? Snipe asks me that question a lot, Kana replied, shocking the three students and sentient quirk. Now follow me for debrief.
And bring Nito.
The students followed their teacher back to the observation room, Dark Shadow carrying the unconscious Nito, who the three were glad was unconscious. Seriously, the sex lives of their teachers were not something they needed to learn about today. They quickly returned to the observation room. You four did well out there.
But can someone wake up Nito? All Might asked.
I'm on it, Momo said as she made some smelling salts and used them to revive Nito. He groaned as he slowly came to before his eyes shot open and he looked around in a panic. Hey. Nito, calm down, Hitoshi said as he tried to calm his friend down, his voice now normal. You're fine. Nito took a few seconds to calm down before he looked at Hitoshi with an annoyed look before he slapped him lightly. What the hell was that?
You know I hate horror.
Reveling in the dark, Fumikage replied. We were told to act like villains, so that's what we did, Hitoshi replied. You are going to have to get used to this kind of thing, you know.
Someone can use that against you. Nito sighed. Yeah, I guess you're right. Hitoshi is correct.
All Might said, realizing your faults and fears this early allows us to help you overcome them. Villains can quite easily use these against you out in the field, so it's best that we help you overcome them now. Now, whilst both teams did well, only one of them can be the MVP.
Can anyone guess who that may be? Momo raised her hand. I believe Fumikage is the MVP.
The hero team suffered from a bad matchup, and whilst Yui was able to take out Hitoshi, she was still taken out herself. And whilst Hitoshi was able to turn the building into a haunted house and unnerve the heroes, his lack of experience with his capture weapon allowed Yui to turn it against him. Fumikage and Dark Shadow ended up taking both of the heroes out, using the fear generated by Hitoshi to take the hero team out one by one. Even if one of them fainted, she said before Dark Shadow zipped over to her and wrapped around her, nuzzling against her for a bit before returning to Fumikage.
Momo had a distinct impression that she was just hugged. An excellent observation, young Momo.
All Might said. Fumikage and Dark Shadow took advantage of the situation to knock out both heroes. Thank you, All Might, Fumikage said, but we couldn't have done it without the appropriate atmosphere of dread Hitoshi had made.
Hitoshi, how did you manage to change your voice anyway? Nito asked.
With this, Hitoshi said, pointing at his mask, I call them persona chords. They allow me to modify my vocal tone to imitate the voices of other people, without converting my voice to electrostatic.
Wow, that's so cool.
Izumi said with a smile, notebook appearing in her hands. That means you can use your quirk whilst sounding like someone else. You can use those to interfere with enemy communications, and make them distrustful of talking to each other. That's the idea, Hitoshi replied, but I still have a lot of training to do. I'm nowhere near as good with this capture weapon as I would like to be.
And I still need to work on getting a response out of someone.
Well, that is why you're here. All Might said, to learn and improve so you can become the best heroes you can be.
He said, now then. On to the next match.
Which will be Team G as the hero team, and Team H as the villains. Both teams head to your starting positions. Himiko smiled with a Cheshire cat grin. Come along, Inasa, let's be villains.
Inasa frowned. I don't like this. We're meant to be heroes, not villains.
Think of it this way, Izumi said, you're heroes who have captured a villain, and the hero team are villains who have come to get their friend back.
Inasa looked at Izumi with a dumbfounded look, right up until he punched himself in the face. That's perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
No problem, Izumi said before the two teams left. So, Izumi, Momo said, who do you think is going to win?
Well, if Himiko does what I think she's going to do, then the heroes don't stand a chance, Izumi replied.
Later.
Run! Rikido shouted as Inasa punched him across the room. His teammate Minoru ran out of the room as fast as his little legs could carry him, carrying the rather heavy Kanetsutsumi. He would have preferred Rikido to be carrying her, but everything had gone to hell in a handbasket so quickly that wasn't really an option. The villain team hadn't really tried to hide the hostage. She was on the first floor, for crying out loud. They had practically given the heroes the win. Well, that's what they thought at first. Then Inasa came in like a cannonball and all the things went to hell. Inasa was more than just strong with his quirk, he was physically strong as well. And unlike Rikido, he didn't need to consume sugar to get stronger.
And Rikido wasn't able to eat much sugar before the fight started.
It was a good thing that they didn't tie Kana to a post or something. It made getting her out of there so much easier.
Rikido Sato has been eliminated, All Might said. Minoru continued to run, ignoring the announcement of his teammates' elimination.
Which wasn't easy when you were carrying a very tall and heavy woman. And as much as he would have liked to carry a woman like this, now was not the time to enjoy it. She was also married, and he didn't want to find himself staring down the gun barrel of Snipe's revolver. He may like staring at sexy women, but married women were his limits. He managed to rush outside and kept running, not stopping until he was out of sight of the building.
Panting heavily, he put Kana down. He did it. He had won. They got the hostage out of the building.
He stood there for a few moments to catch his breath. He then noticed something. All Might hadn't called the match. All Might, Minoru said into his comms, I got the hostage out, you can call the match, he said.
He didn't get a response, All Might?
A boot suddenly kicked him in the face, sending him to the ground. Before he could look up, he was wrapped up in capture tape. He looked up and saw Kana standing over him, smiling.
Miss Kana.
What the hell are you doing? Minoru shouted. You're not supposed to help the villains.
Kana looked down at him and smirked. Of course not.
But she said before her body started to turn into some kind of gray goo and fell to the floor. Minoru could only stare in horror as their teacher melted, revealing Himiko standing over him, smiling at him. I'm pretty sure I'm not a teacher.
Minoru Mineta has been eliminated.
All Might said. Villain team win. Himiko giggled. You really didn't stand a chance against us, she said before she picked him up and held him as far away from her as she could. Don't worry, this is just so you don't stare at my rear on the way back. Both teams made their way back to the observation room, to much fanfare. Himiko, that was evil what you did, Hitoshi said with a smile.
Himiko grinned. Glad you liked it. Evil, you transformed into Kana. Minoru shouted.
Which was a smart move, Kana said with a slight smirk. Himiko isn't the only one out there whose quirk allows them to transform into someone else. There are many others like it, and some villains may try and deceive you, just like Himiko did.
Exactly. All Might added. I too have fallen for this trick from time to time. This is something you will have to be wary of when rescuing hostages. You never know if one of them is a villain. Now then, time to decide who's the MVP.
It's Himiko, Hitoshi said. She disguised herself as the hostage and tricked the hero team into thinking she was the real hostage.
Precisely.
All Might said. By transforming into the hostage and waiting on a lower floor, the hero team did not check the other floors for the real hostage. Take this as a warning, overconfidence can easily get you killed out in the field.
Now, for the next match.
Team I as the hero team, and Team J as the villains. Both teams head to your starting positions.
Mina jumped up in excitement. Yes, our time to shine. We've got this, Ijiro. 10 minutes later. We didn't have this. Mina groaned as they returned to the observation room. Mina and Ijiro didn't fare very well against Kyoka and Denki.
Thanks to Kyoka's quirk, they knew where both the villains and the hostage were at all times. Plus their quirks were perfect for countering theirs.
The shockwaves produced by Kyoka's jacks were perfect for dealing with Ijiro. His hardened skin made the shockwaves hit harder.
And Mina's acid proved to be quite conductive, allowing Denki to electrocute it when Mina tried to escape, resulting in an overwhelming victory for the hero team. "I'm sorry, Mina," Ijiro said with a sigh. "I couldn't stop her." "It's okay, Ijiro," Mina said. "We did our best."
"Well, that went precisely as I said it would," Izumi remarked.
Kyoka was declared the MVP of that round, due to her plan for defeating the villain team being executed perfectly. The last match wasn't that eventful. Whilst Hanta taped the hostage to a support beam, with Toru stripping down to make the most use of her quirk. It didn't matter much as when All Might started the match, the entire building was suddenly swarmed with rats.
Koji had more than enough time to make a lot of friends.
When the swarm of rats appeared, Toru screamed out of the building, leaving Hanta to try, and fail, to handle a large swarm of rats.
"Well, that didn't last long," Izumi remarked as Tenya rushed into the building and rescued a now free Kana.
"Talk about overwhelming power," Achiko said.
Yui said with a nod.
"I'm so glad I'm not in there," Mina shuddered. "I don't want to know what having those rats crawl all over me feels like."
"I feel bad for Toru," Kyoka added with a shudder.
She hated rats, always scratching between the walls. "I am glad we have Hound Dog," Ijiro said, shuddering at the thought of being surrounded by so many rats. The two teams returned to the observation room. Whilst they couldn't see it, they could tell that Toru was shaking.
"You okay, Toru?" Izumi asked softly.
"No," Toru squeaked. "I need my comfort plush dash," she said before she suddenly found Izumi's Durandal plush shoved into her chest.
"Here.
You can borrow mine for a bit," Izumi said with a soft smile.
"Where were you carrying that?" Hanta asked. "You know what? Never mind. I do not want to know."
"Good call," Durandal said. Despite being an alpha-level AI, even he didn't know where Izumi pulled her notebooks and other stuff out of. It's like she had a secret pocket dimension within that curly mess of hair of hers.
"Why do you have a plush version of Durandal?" Denki asked before he was poked by one of Kyoka's jacks.
"Do not insult the power of the comfort plush,"
Kyoka said with a frown. "Duly noted," Denki said, rubbing his head.
All Might coughed to get everyone's attention before telling everyone that they did well.
To no one's surprise, Koji was declared the MVP.
"You've all done well today," Kana said with a smile. "All of you demonstrated skills that will be useful as heroes. I'll be going over your matches later and giving you some feedback tomorrow. Don't be disheartened if you lost or didn't perform as well as you would have liked." All Might added, "It's only your first day of UA. You will have plenty of time to learn and improve over the next 3 years. Now, watch as I demonstrate a hero leaving like he has somewhere to be," he said before he rocketed out of the room.
"Awesome," Mina said with a smile.
The class then proceeded back to the changing rooms.
The lesson was fun and they learned a lot from it.
Plus Izumi was able to learn a lot more about her classmates' quirks. She had so many ideas for what they could do with them and how to improve them. Ideas that she couldn't wait to tell them about. She immediately started changing the moment she entered the changing room, slipping out of her shoes and bodysuit. But as she was putting it back, she noticed something, a small hole in the side of the wall. She crouched down and put her ear near it. She could hear talking from the other side of the hole. The boys talking. The hole led to the boys' changing room and was large enough for someone to look through it. It was a peephole. Girls. There's a hole dash, she said as she stood up and turned towards the others, and immediately regretted it as they were all partially changed, not helped by the fact that some of them were in the process of changing their bras.
"What?"
The other girls all gasped.
Where? Kyoka asked as she walked over.
Izumi sheepishly looked away and pointed towards the hole. Her face was very, very red. "The boys' changing room is on the other side of that wall," Achiko remarked before all of them felt a sudden sense of dread. If Minoru finds that, then he'll be able to peek on us, Toru gasped with a shudder. I'll stab him if he does that, Himiko said with a snarl. We should tell the teachers about this rib bit, Tsuyu remarked. On second thoughts, I have a better idea, Momo said as she walked over, wearing only a pair of panties, causing Izumi to scream internally. She created 2 items, a small cylinder just large enough to fit into the hole, and some sealant. She put the cylinder in first and used the sealant to keep it inside there. What did you just do? Mina asked as she and the other girls all crowded around them, which only caused Izumi to panic even more. Oh, you'll find out the moment Minoru looks through that hole, Momo said with a devious smile before she noticed the nervous state Izumi was in. Izumi, are you okay? What? Izumi yelped, still trying her best to look away. Yes, of course, I'm fine, really, perfectly fine, she said, totally not undergoing a full-on panic attack due to having a large number of attractive half-naked women around me. The room became rather quiet after that, a bit too quiet. Izumi, Achiko said. Did you mean to mutter that last part out? Izumi froze. She said that out loud. That was among the worst things she could have done. Tears slowly started to form around her eyes. She quickly covered her face with her hands and turned to face the wall, and began to cry. Of fucking course she had to mutter that last part out. Because why not? She's always muttering about something, and now she just embarrassed herself in front of half the class. They probably think she was a creep now. She was just a useless, Deku. The other girls looked at Izumi with mixed looks of horror and regret, quickly realizing what they had just done to the poor girl. Momo and Achiko had it worse, as the former was walking about with her breasts exposed, and the latter had brought Izumi's muttering to everyone's attention. Momo quickly rushed over to her stuff and quickly put a bra on, whilst the other girls all backed off, giving Izumi some much-needed space. Izumi, Achiko said softly, I'm sorry for outing you like that. I didn't realize we were making you uncomfortable. But, I said you were half naked. Izumi stuttered, wondering why Achiko was apologizing. Yes, and thanks for pointing that out, Kyoka said. We might not have realized that we were making you uncomfortable otherwise. But I saw you, Izumi said, still crying. What if I had perverted thoughts about you? Yes, and? Who hasn't? Himiko said I have perverted thoughts about our classmates all the time. Heck, even had a few about our teachers. I just keep those thoughts to myself, unlike that grapist who outs every single perverted thing that enters his head. Seriously, if it weren't for that diaper he was wearing I would have punted him in the dick during our match. Plus my costume doesn't leave much to the imagination anyway, Momo added. You're not like Minoru, Izumi, Toru said. You're anything but him. So don't even think of comparing yourself to that creep. Besides, we're all girls here. I don't mind if another girl sees me half naked, she said, getting a confused look from Kyoka. Izumi slowly turned her head around. Why, you're not mad? Why should we? Tsuyu said, if anything we're to blame for crowding around you like that and making you uncomfortable, ribbit. I would suggest a group hug, but I don't want to make things worse. Mina said we can have one later. If you want one, Izumi. I'm sorry for making you feel uncomfortable, Momo said. I didn't realize you weren't comfortable being crowded around like that. Izumi gasped. This wasn't what she was expecting. She thought she would have to apologize to them for being a creep, not the other way around. Shouldn't she have been the one to make them uncomfortable? Hey, Izumi, Toru said beside her. The green-haired girl turned to see Toru holding her Durandal plush up towards her. You might want this back now. Izumi's eyes slowly widened as she took the plush back. Thank you, she said quietly as she hugged it tightly. This felt different from what she was used to, but it also felt better. No one was shouting at her, or being mean to her. They were friendly towards her and realized that they were at fault, not her. She still wasn't used to people being nice to her, not this many anyway. She thought that the only friends she would have at UA would be Hitoshi and Nito. She didn't expect to make any more or be on friendly terms with most of the class. She couldn't say all since Minoru was in the class with them. But, to be on good terms with most of the class, wasn't something she was used to. No problem, Toru said. We should get changed quickly, Mina said. I don't want to cause Izumi any more discomfort than we've already had. The other girls nodded before they went back to getting changed, getting dressed into their school uniforms. Izumi stood there for a few minutes, holding her plush closely. The other girls quickly got changed to give her some privacy, since they didn't want to make her any more uncomfortable than she already was. Once they were all gone, she got changed herself, getting into her school uniform quickly and leaving alongside Durandal. But was surprised when she found the girls waiting outside. "Ha! Why you were waiting for me?" Izumi said, sounding surprised. "We didn't want you to walk back all by yourself," Achiko said with a smile, and once again, "we're sorry for making you feel uncomfortable earlier." It's okay," Izumi said. "I'm still not used to people being nice to me." The other girls all smiled at her with friendly smiles, but inside they felt worried about her. This kind of behavior wasn't normal. She shouldn't break down like this when surrounded by friends. Several of them wondered just what happened to her for her to be like this. "Come on, let's head back to the dorm," Himiko said. "I'm going to ask Rikido to make something to help comfort Izumi." Izumi smiled as she joined the others as they headed back to the dorm. "Izumi Midoriya," a female voice said behind her, stopping them in their tracks. Izumi jumped as she turned around, and saw a tall and curvy girl standing behind her. She looked about her age, with light blue eyes, long light blue hair tied into triple tails, wearing a light blue leotard that showed a good amount of cleavage, thigh-high stockings, and high-heeled boots. Izumi started to fangirl because this was the VTuber hero, Horigaramu. UA's vice principal and the only VTuber Izumi has ever watched. "Yes," Izumi said with a nervous smile. "Blossom has asked me to come and collect you for your quirk counseling season with her." Horigaramu said. "If you could kindly follow me, please." Izumi nodded before turning towards the others. "Sorry girls, but I have to do this." "It's okay Izumi," Achiko said with a smile. "You can catch up with us later." Izumi nodded with a smile. "I'll see you lot later then," she said before she walked off with Horigaramu and Durandal. "I keep forgetting Horigaramu is the vice principal," Mina said as they watched them leave, getting a few odd looks from the others. "What, I like watching VTubers." Izumi was a mix of excitement and worry. Excitement because she was walking with Horigaramu on their way to talk to Blossom. Worry because she was going to talk to Blossom about her quirk, one for all, something she was dreading as there were so many secrets to it. Things she couldn't tell her without giving up the secret, but without that knowledge, there wasn't much she could do to help. She shook her head. She needed a distraction. Good thing there was something she could do to distract her Horigaramu. "Yes Izumi," Horigaramu said with a smile. "Your quirk, hard light, how does it work?" Izumi asked, holding one of her notebooks. "I know you can create copies of yourself and objects out of light. But no one's ever been able to tell how you're able to do it. I know it must be some kind of projection quirk since you always have a camera drone following you around just out of sight when outside. Plus I've noticed that there's always a camera tracking you." Horigaramu looked somewhat surprised by that. "Wait, you've seen the drones?" Izumi nodded. "They may be invisible, but I could just see them in a few shots." "Wow," Horigaramu remarked. "You're the third person to notice that." "And yes, it is a projection quirk. I can project anything I want anywhere, as long as I have eyes on it, including through a camera. It's why I also work security," she said. "This body you see before you is one such projection. The real me is somewhere else on campus." "Oh wow," Izumi said. "How many projections can you make? Are there any limits to what you can make? What's the range of your quirk? Are time delays an issue? Can you hear anything around your projections?" she asked, bombarding her with a mutterstorm of questions. "As many as I like. No limits as far as I can tell, but I can't make cameras that I can use to project my quirk. Depends on how far the camera can zoom."
Yes, they have to be in real time. Even the smallest of time delays prevent me from projecting through it, and yes, Horigaramu replied, answering all of Izumi's questions. Wait, you understood all of that? Durandal said, sounding surprised. Horigaramu nodded every word of it. Huh, Durandal said, and here I thought only an AI could keep up with her. My mother can keep up with my mumbling. Izumi said. That's because you inherited it from her, Durandal said. Fair point. Oh yes, Nizu wanted me to inform you that UA staff are aware of who made Durandal and what he can do, Horigaramu said, and to advise you not to use his quirk emulator unless it's absolutely necessary. Don't worry, All Might's already informed me about this, Izumi said. We'll keep it low profile, she said, just as they reached one of the training gyms. Blossom waiting outside for them. Izumi. It is good to see you, Blossom said. I am Kanto Aizo, also known as Blossom Cough Cough. I will be your quirk counselor from now on. Thank you for doing this for me, Izumi said with a bow. I'll be in your care. Kanto bowed slightly. So, I've been told that your quirk, power stockpile, came in on the day of the exam, is that correct? Izumi nodded yes. It's a stockpile quirk that enhances my body, but I can only use a small amount of my power, about 5%, and I have to spread it out across my entire body, otherwise, I'll break myself whilst using it. I see, Kanto said. Well, that is a problem with most stockpile quirks. Cough cough, sometimes your stockpile stores too much. But I'm glad you were able to get a handle on it so quickly. Tell me, does using your quirk discharge your stockpile? Izumi shook her head. As far as I can tell, no. I can only increase it, not decrease it. I see. That'll make handling it harder, Kanto said, but that is why we are here. Cough cough, to help figure out all the ins and outs of your quirk. Izumi nodded. Whilst she knew a lot about her quirk already, thanks to All Might, there was still a lot she didn't know about it. The number one hero wasn't that good at explaining it after all. Plus there was something else on her mind. Kanto, there's just one small thing I would like to ask you before we start the counseling session. What's your quirk? Kanto chuckled before Izumi suddenly found herself surrounded by a thick swarm of black cherry blossoms. She was amazed by it, watching as the cherry blossom circled around her like a tornado. She could tell that each blossom was razor sharp, but none of them came close to cutting her, despite flowing quite close to her. The level of control Kanto had to be able to do this without harming her was impressive. The swarm of cherry blossoms disappeared just as quickly as it had appeared, and to Izumi's surprise, they were now inside the gym. Now that was an interesting form of transportation, Durandal remarked looking around. Beats quantum teleportation. I call it Sakura Embers, Kanto said. It allows me to create, control and manipulate black cherry bosom. Cough cough, she said as she raised a hand, and a small swarm of black cherry bosom appeared above it. I can use them for a multitude of purposes, from offensive, defensive, and transportation. That's so cool. Izumi beamed, notebook in hand. She was about to go on another mutter storm but was stopped by Horigaramu taking her notebook away. No, you are not bombarding her with questions, Horigaramu said with a frown. We're here to talk about your quirk, not hers. Horigaramu, please. I am quite used to being cough cough bombarded with questions, Kanto said. I am Nijire's homeroom teacher after all. I can deal with one more endlessly curious girl. Perhaps you'd like to cough cough meet her at some point, Izumi. That sounds like a recipe for disaster, Durandal remarked, but who am I to stop you? What's the worst that could happen? Somewhere in UA, a periwinkle-haired girl was suddenly filled with a sense of anticipation, like she was going to meet someone very interesting very soon. Kanto chuckled. Well, I can't wait to see how that interaction will play out. But, that's for cough cough later. For now, let us return to the task at hand. We have your first quirk counseling session to do. Izumi nodded. She only had the basics of her quirk sorted out, so the more she knew about how One for All worked, the better. That will be it for this part. I hope everyone enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like and comment if you want part 14. If you want to hear more from me, subscribe. I hope to see you all in the next one.